The morning was supposed to be calm, just another routine patrol through the reserve. Daniel adjusted the strap of his radio and kept walking along the dusty trail, his boots crunching softly with every step. The sun had risen only an hour ago, and the forest still carried that fresh smell of dew and earth. For years he had walked these same paths, and he thought he knew every sound, every rustle of the leaves. But what he heard now made his heart stumble. It wasn't the call of a bird or the chatter of monkeys. It was sharper, higher, filled with pain. A scream. Daniel froze in his tracks. For a few seconds, he strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the direction. Then it came again, tearing through the morning air like a knife. Without hesitation, he broke into a run. Branches scraped against his arms as he pushed through the undergrowth. The cries grew louder, more desperate. Then, suddenly, the forest opened into a clearing. What he saw froze his blood. On the ground, a massive python was coiled tight around a lynx. The cat's chest heaved, its claws raking at the dirt as it tried to fight the crushing pressure. Daniel's eyes widened when he noticed her swollen belly. She was pregnant. Every second the snake squeezed tighter, forcing the air from her lungs. Around them stood 3 other lynxes, tense and unmoving. Their yellow eyes locked on the struggle, but their bodies paralyzed with fear. For a heartbeat, Daniel couldn't move. His training told him to be careful, that interfering with a predator of this size could cost him dearly. But then the lynx let out another strangled cry, weaker this time, and something inside him snapped. He tightened his grip on the wooden stick he always carried on patrol. His boots hit the ground hard as he rushed forward. The lynxes noticed him and shifted uneasily, but they didn't attack. Their attention was locked on the python and their struggling companion. The snake's body glistened in the sunlight, thick as Daniel's thigh, every muscle contracting with terrifying force. Its head was raised, tongue flickering in and out, tasting the air. The lynx's eyes rolled back for a moment, and Daniel's heart pounded harder. He couldn't waste time. He shouted, hoping the noise would distract the python. It didn't even flinch. Daniel swung the stick hard, striking at the thick coils near the lynx's chest. The sound of wood on muscle rang out, but the snake didn't loosen its grip. Instead, it tightened, and the lynx's claws scraped weakly against the dirt. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. He swung again, harder this time, then jabbed at the snake's side. Finally, its head turned toward him, tongue flicking, eyes glinting with cold indifference. The other lynxes stepped forward now, low growls rumbling in their throats, but they stopped short, unsure whether to risk it. Daniel's breathing grew ragged. He circled, keeping his eyes on the snake's head. The lynx beneath its coils let out a muffled wheeze, her ribs visibly straining. He had seconds, maybe less. "Come on, let go," he shouted, striking again. The python hissed, its body shifting slightly. It wasn't enough. The lynx's mouth opened in a silent gasp, and Daniel felt dread settle in his chest. The thought flashed through his mind. If he failed now, he would not only lose her, but her unborn kittens too. Sweat stung his eyes, but he gritted his teeth and pressed closer. He jabbed at the snake's head, forcing it to lift and turn. It struck at him suddenly, a blur of scales and teeth. Daniel stumbled back, narrowly dodging the attack, his heart hammering against his ribs. The lynxes behind him hissed, their tails lashing in agitation. The python recoiled, settling its gaze on him now. Its coils still crushed the lynx, but Daniel saw the faintest slack in its grip. The cat's chest rose in one shallow breath. She was still alive, but fading fast. Daniel raised his stick again, lungs burning as he sucked in air. He had to make a choice: risk his own life in a direct struggle or watch her die before his eyes. There was no time left to think. With a yell that tore from the bottom of his lungs, he lunged forward, driving the stick toward the python's mouth. And in that split second, he knew there was no turning back. Daniel's stick jammed into the python's open mouth, forcing its head to snap back. The snake recoiled, hissing in fury, but its thick coils still crushed the lynx beneath it. The sound of her strangled wheeze reached Daniel's ears, and he felt panic flare through his chest. He couldn't let her slip away now. He swung again, striking at the snake's side with every ounce of strength he had. The wood cracked against the muscular body, but the python only shifted slightly, tightening again around the lynx's ribs. The cat's paws twitched weakly, her claws scraping shallow lines in the dirt. Daniel's throat was dry, his breath ragged. He knew the seconds were running out. He took a step closer, jabbing the stick repeatedly at the snake's head. Each thrust drew another hiss, another shift of those terrible coils. Sweat poured down his temples, soaking his shirt. He couldn't think about anything else. Not the danger, not the fact that he was alone. Only the desperate need to break the python's grip. Behind him, the growls of the other lynxes grew louder. They moved a few steps forward, their eyes burning with tension. Their muscles quivered, ready to spring, but uncertainty kept them in place. Daniel felt their presence like a weight on his back. If they attacked him instead of the snake, everything would end in blood. He couldn't afford a wrong move. "Stay back," he shouted hoarsely, though he knew they didn't understand his words. His eyes never left the python. The snake lunged at him again, striking with terrifying speed. Daniel jerked aside, the air buzzing past his ear as the jaws snapped shut where his face had been a second before. He stumbled, but caught his balance, heart hammering. The lynx on the ground let out a faint, broken cry, barely audible now. Gritting his teeth, Daniel raised the stick high and slammed it down on the snake's neck, just behind the head. The impact shuddered through his arms. This time, the python recoiled violently, twisting its body in pain. The coils loosened, just slightly, but enough for the lynx's chest to rise in one desperate gasp. Daniel saw it and pressed harder. He struck again, aiming for the same spot. The snake hissed, its body writhing. The lynxes around him growled louder, taking another cautious step closer. One of them bared its teeth, tail slashing through the air. The balance of the scene was razor-thin. Man, predator, and prey all locked together in a fragile standoff. The python suddenly whipped its body around, knocking Daniel's legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, the stick flying from his hands. For a moment, the sky spun above him. He scrambled, dirt in his mouth, lungs burning. The snake's shadow loomed, its head weaving back and forth. Daniel lunged for the stick, fingers brushing against it. The python struck again, jaws snapping shut inches from his arm. He grabbed the stick, rolling onto his side, and jammed it upward just in time. The snake's head smashed into the wood, teeth scraping. Daniel grunted, straining to hold it back. The lynx beneath the coils gave another weak cry, her paws twitching. Daniel's eyes flicked to her belly, and the sight fueled him with fresh determination. He couldn't let this end here. He pushed with everything he had, shoving the python's head away and scrambling to his feet. He struck once more at the coils, this time with wild, desperate force. The snake thrashed, the ground trembling beneath its massive body. The other lynxes hissed loudly, their muscles bunching as if ready to join the fight. Daniel couldn't tell if they were on his side or simply reacting to the chaos. The python loosened its grip again, and the lynx on the ground gasped, sucking in another shallow breath. It was working, but Daniel's arms shook from exhaustion, his chest heaving. Every swing drained him more. He knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. The snake's head turned back toward him, eyes cold and unblinking. It coiled tighter once more, and Daniel felt dread sink into his stomach. He had weakened it. Yes, but not enough. The lynx wheezed, her sides trembling with the effort of each breath. Daniel raised his stick again, sweat dripping into his eyes. He had managed to loosen the python's hold for a moment. But would he have the strength to finish what he had started? Daniel struck again with every ounce of strength left in him. The stick cracked against the python's body, and this time, the snake recoiled violently, twisting its coils away. The pregnant lynx collapsed onto the dirt, gasping for air, her chest rising and falling in shallow, broken rhythms. The python hissed furiously, writhing in pain, then finally slithered back into the tall grass, its massive body disappearing into the undergrowth. The clearing fell into a tense silence. Daniel dropped to his knees beside the lynx, his heart still hammering against his ribs. Her fur was damp with sweat and dirt, and her flanks trembled with every breath. He reached out cautiously, his hand hovering above her side. Her eyes were half closed, and her belly rose unevenly, the life inside her fighting to stay alive. Behind him, the other lynxes paced, growling low in their throats. Daniel kept one eye on them, expecting them to charge at any moment, but their attention seemed fixed on their weakened companion. He whispered softly, more to steady himself than anything. "You're okay now, you're okay." His radio crackled at his side. With shaking hands, he pressed the button. "This is Ranger Daniel. Emergency. I have an injured lynx, pregnant female. Attacked by a python. I need backup and transport immediately. Coordinates." He rattled off the numbers quickly, his voice rough with urgency. Static filled the silence for a moment, then a voice answered. "Copy that, Daniel. Hold tight. We're sending a team." Relief washed through him, but it was fragile, fleeting. He knew how quickly things could change. The lynx wheezed again, her breath shallow and uneven. Daniel grabbed his water canteen, pouring a little into the cap, and carefully tilted it toward her mouth. A few drops touched her lips, and she flicked her tongue weakly, swallowing. He exhaled shakily. Minutes dragged like hours. The other lynxes lingered at the edge of the clearing, watching. Daniel kept his body between them and the weakened animal, his stick ready in case they turned hostile. Sweat drenched his back, and his arms still trembled from the fight. At last, the rumble of an engine cut through the stillness. A jeep appeared on the trail, bouncing over the dirt. Two rangers jumped out, med kit in hand. Daniel waved them over, relief tightening his chest. "She's bad," Daniel said quickly. "The python nearly crushed her lungs. She's pregnant." One ranger, a woman named Carla, knelt beside the lynx, slipping on gloves. She checked the cat's breathing, then pressed gently along her ribs. "Her pulse is weak. We have to move fast." The other ranger, Mike, pulled a stretcher from the jeep. The three of them worked together, lifting the lynx carefully, sliding her onto the canvas. She let out a faint moan, her head rolling weakly to the side. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Let's get her to the station," Carla said firmly. The jeep jolted into motion, carrying them back along the trail. Daniel sat in the back with the lynx, keeping one hand near her flank, feeling the faint movement beneath her swollen belly. Every bump in the road made him wince, fearing it might push her past the edge. At the veterinary station, the team rushed her inside. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled Daniel's nose as bright lights flooded the room. The lynx was laid out on the table, her sides rising weakly. Two veterinarians immediately began working, checking her lungs, her heartbeat, her belly. Daniel stood in the corner, his fists clenched. Carla joined him, speaking low. "She's lost a lot of oxygen. The babies could be in distress. If her lungs collapse," she trailed off, her eyes grim. Daniel pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to block out the sterile chaos around him. He couldn't let himself believe she had survived the python only to die here, in front of him. He thought of the moment her eyes had flickered open in the clearing, fighting for breath, refusing to give up. One of the vets looked up, voice tight. "She's critical. We'll do everything we can, but honestly, I don't know if she'll make it through the night." Daniel closed his eyes, the words striking him harder than any blow. He leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. The room hummed with the sounds of machines, the hushed voices of the medical team. All he could do now was wait. The lynx lay motionless on the table, her breath shallow, the fragile line between life and death stretched thin. Daniel clenched his fists tighter, whispering under his breath, "Don't give up now. Not after all this." The night had only just begun, and already it felt endless. The night dragged on like an eternity. Daniel barely slept, pacing the corridor outside the treatment room. Every so often, he would glance through the small glass window, watching the veterinarians move around the table. Tubes ran into the lynx's body, monitors beeped steadily, and her chest rose in shallow, fragile breaths. Each sound carried the weight of life hanging by a thread. By morning, the door opened, and Carla stepped out, exhaustion plain in her eyes. "She made it through the night," she said softly. Relief flooded Daniel's chest, though it was tempered by the sight of her pale face. "But she's still very weak. We'll need to monitor her closely." Daniel exhaled slowly, nodding. It wasn't victory yet, but it was hope. The following days blended into a routine. Daniel visited the recovery ward each morning, bringing with him quiet patience. The lynx lay in a large enclosure, her body wrapped with bandages where the python had bruised and crushed her ribs. At first, she barely moved, her amber eyes half closed, only flicking open when someone entered. On the third day, Daniel entered quietly, crouching by the bars. "You're tougher than you look," he murmured. The lynx stirred, turning her head toward him. For the first time, he saw recognition in her gaze, a faint spark of awareness. She gave a low growl, not of full aggression but of warning, a reminder that she was still wild. Daniel didn't move closer. He simply sat on the floor, letting her watch him. Minutes passed in silence until she lowered her head back to the blanket, her breathing even but shallow. Each day, the improvements came in small, hard-earned steps. She licked at the bowl of water placed near her. Later, she shifted her weight, testing her strength. On the 5th day, she managed to lift herself to her feet, trembling but determined. Daniel watched from behind the glass, heart pounding. Her legs shook violently, but she stayed up for several breaths before collapsing back onto the bedding. It was progress. By the end of the week, she was standing longer, taking a few unsteady steps around the enclosure. The staff stayed cautious, never pushing her too hard. Daniel continued to visit, sometimes speaking in a quiet tone, sometimes just sitting in silence. He began to feel that she recognized his presence, the same man who had fought to pull her from death's grip. But recovery wasn't only gentle. On one afternoon visit, Daniel stepped too close to the bars. The lynx bared her teeth, ears pinned back, a deep growl vibrating from her chest. She swiped with one paw, claws scraping against the metal. Daniel froze, realizing her instinct for survival was returning along with her strength. Fear and aggression were signs of life. He backed away slowly, hands raised. "Easy," he whispered. "You're getting stronger. That's all right." Despite her aggression, he noticed moments of hesitation in her eyes. She was wary, not purely hostile. She seemed caught between fear and recognition, the instincts of the wild clashing with the memory of his help. Carla observed her progress with measured optimism. Her lungs are healing. The babies, they're still moving. That's the best sign we could ask for. Daniel nodded, relief tempered by concern. So she's strong enough? Carla's expression was cautious. Strong enough to keep fighting, yes. But the delivery will be risky. We have to be prepared. That night, Daniel returned alone, after most of the staff had left. He sat near the enclosure again, his back against the wall. The lynx lay curled on her blanket, her breathing steadier now. At one point, she lifted her head, staring at him for a long while. Her eyes glinted in the dim light, not entirely hostile, not entirely trusting. Then she let out a quiet rumble and lowered her head again. Daniel whispered into the silence, "We're not done yet. You hold on. I'll be here." As the days passed, her movements grew steadier. She began pacing the enclosure, her tail flicking with restless energy. The staff noted her appetite returning, her body regaining some of its former strength. Yet with every passing day, her belly grew heavier, and the signs of approaching birth became clearer. One evening, Daniel stood with Carla at the observation window. The lynx shifted restlessly, her sides contracting slightly. Carla folded her arms, her voice low. "It won't be long now." Daniel's eyes followed the lynx, a knot forming in his stomach. She was stronger, yes, but still fragile. The coming days would decide everything. Hope and dread mixed inside him as he whispered to himself, "Please let her make it through." The tension in the recovery ward reached its peak on a rainy evening. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the scent of damp earth drifted in through the windows. Daniel stood by the glass, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, watching the lynx pace her enclosure restlessly. Her movements were sharp, her sides contracting visibly. Carla stepped up beside him, her face serious. "It's starting," she said quietly. "She's going into labor." Daniel's pulse spiked. He leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. Inside, the lynx circled, her tail lashing, growls rumbling deep in her throat. She lowered herself onto the bedding, then rose again, restless and unsettled. The staff gathered quickly, preparing the room. Supplies were laid out, gloves snapped on, voices low but urgent. Minutes stretched into hours. The lynx labored fiercely, her body trembling with the effort. Daniel watched every movement, fists clenched at his sides. He could do nothing but bear witness, his heart breaking with each pained cry. The memory of the python's crushing coils flashed in his mind. How close she had come to death. Now, it was life itself she was fighting to bring forward. Carla entered the enclosure with 2 veterinarians, moving cautiously but efficiently. They spoke in calm tones, guiding the lynx's labor without intruding too much. Daniel pressed a hand against the glass, whispering under his breath, "Come on, you can do this." At last, a small, Damp form slid onto the blanket. The first kitten. The lynx turned immediately, licking it clean, nudging it with her nose. A weak mule rose, high and fragile, but alive. Daniel's chest tightened as relief washed through him. First one's breathing, Carla called out, her voice steadier now. The staff readied for more. The lynx strained again, her body racked with effort. Daniel couldn't tear his eyes away. He thought of the moment he had found her, the weight of the snake around her ribs, and marveled at the miracle unfolding before him. The second kitten came, then a third. Each one greeted the world with small, urgent cries. The mother tended to them fiercely, her strength returning with each new life she welcomed. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes as he watched her curl protectively around the tiny bodies. Hours later, the storm outside had quieted, but inside, the air was charged with quiet wonder. The lynx lay stretched on the bedding, 3 newborn kittens nestled against her belly. Their fragile bodies rose and fell with the rhythm of her breathing. For the first time since the attack, she looked peaceful. Carla stepped back from the enclosure, removing her gloves. "They made it," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "All of them." Daniel exhaled shakily, his shoulders sagging. He stayed at the glass, unable to look away. The kittens squirmed and rooted blindly, their small sounds filling the room. The lynx lifted her head once, her amber eyes locking with his. For a heartbeat, Daniel felt the world narrow to that single moment. Man and animal, 2 lives intersecting in a way neither could forget. He whispered, barely audible, "You did it." Silence filled the room, but it was a silence heavy with meaning. The weight of survival, of fragile new life, of a future that had seemed impossible only days before. Later, when the staff drifted out, Daniel remained. He sat against the wall, watching through the glass as the lynx curled tighter around her young. The soft sound of their mewling was a lullaby, a reminder of everything that had been risked, everything that had been saved. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. His hands no longer trembled. Instead, he felt a warmth spread through his chest, the profound knowledge that his choice to intervene had changed not just one life, but many. The storm had passed, both outside and within. In its place was the quiet triumph of life, fragile but unbroken. Daniel leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. The image of the kittens safe against their mother would stay with him forever. It was proof that even in the wild, even in the face of impossible odds, a single act of courage could ripple outward, shaping the destiny of an entire bloodline. The night ended not in fear, but in peace. Life had won, and Daniel knew he would carry that truth with him for the rest of his days.